Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am really happy to introduce my guest, Saskia Mulder, this morning, who has joined me today. So Saskia has long COVID, like so many of us, and has recently embarked on treatments overseas. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So thank you so much for joining me today. Would you mind introducing yourself a little bit and sort of what you did before COVID?
That's so far back now, isn't it?
I know it is. It's hard to remember, isn't it?
I try to remember that one. I am a nurse. I'm a psych nurse. My background is in psychiatry. And before I became unwell, I worked in a hospital, but also have done a lot of time in community nursing as well. And I was a deputy manager in an over 65 acute admissions ward. It was primarily a ward for people with mental illness, but because of the age group, obviously, of the patients, there was a lot of medical issues with people. So in our ward, it was really like a little mini medical ward with psychiatry, and we had lots of extra additional training to manage patients in that ward. And we regularly would have had people developing sepsis, heart attacks, strokes, and then we would have had the mental illness side as well. So I worked there for a couple of years. I really, really liked that post. And I was also qualified in several alternative therapies. So I'm a Reiki master. I do a bit of kinesiology and aromatherapy. And my life was that I was working full-time and more. I was seeing people from home with my alternative practice, and I had just started that. That was just started up and running and completed my training. And then COVID hit, and our ward was the first ward to get in the hospital because of their age bracket again. And it was the very first wave that came over from Wuhan. We were completely ill prepared, as you can imagine, and our PPE consisted of a surgical mask, latex gloves to the wrist, and aprons that were thinner than bin bags. And, you know, it was a bit strange because in Italy and Wuhan, you've seen everybody wrapped up like almost like in NASA spacesuits, and we were in this flimsy gear that we knew was completely not enough. And at that time, the staffing was really bad on the ward, and we had lots of agency staff in who many didn't want to go into the people with COVID. A lot of fear at that time in the ward. And myself and a handful of other staff that were regulars ended up doing all the COVID care in and out 3 or 4 times a day, whatever they needed, we'd give them. And of course, I was out in a week. And I thought to myself I would be back in a couple of weeks. And I'm still out 27 months later and still haven't returned to that world.
I mean, I think we were saying just before we came on here, it's quite hard to remember back to that time, isn't it? You know, we'd seen China, we'd seen Italy, and then it hit us. And for some reason, I don't know, it was like we were naive and we didn't really think, oh, you know, we'll be fine.
Yeah.
Obviously, we weren't. But it's obviously a sort of full-on job that you were doing before you got ill.
Yeah, and if I look back now, I think I probably was in a bit of a burnout for a few years before I became unwell. When you start to piece your life together, when you have a lot of time to reflect and you listen to Jez's videos, you know, those wonderful YouTube videos about, well, we all know the mind and the body is connected anyway. And when I look back, I probably had lots of things that, like, sort of slight mast cell issues were going on, but I thought it was just that I was intolerant to the air, the trees, the pollen. I was constantly tired. Although I would have been a big walker and done yoga, and I had a busy life, I never felt fully refreshed, but I didn't really piece it together until I became unwell, and then I could go, I think I was pushing myself too much.
Yeah, and it seems like there are so many people, exactly as you've just described, that have ended up with long COVID.
Yeah.
And I've certainly had some of the same reflections. And we just push through, don't we? Because we can.
Yes.
Why shouldn't we? We're young, we're healthy. Why shouldn't we just keep pushing? That's what you do. Except it shouldn't be.
Totally. And I think if it's your character, my character is to get up and get on with life, no matter what. It's the way my mother was. That's the way I was brought up. And I think you just do it, don't you? You're just either that type of a person or you're not. And I think this illness has enabled me to reflect that is not the way I want to be going forward. Whatever's going to happen with my health, it's certainly not the way I'll be if I ever get back to that life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you got ill very quickly.
Very quickly.
And I guess, like a lot of us thought, oh well, I'll be fine in a few weeks. Like a lot of people, did you start to get better and then get worse again, or how did that progress?
So what happened with me is I went out with the typical symptoms. I was actually in the ward and my throat was raw. I was feeling extra fatigued, and I thought put it down to that I'd been doing extra shifts because of, there's no staff. And I remember my chest feeling tight, and I have never had respiratory problems in my life, ever. And I remember going home and steaming myself with apple cider vinegar, and my sore throat was fine the next day, but I couldn't breathe. I woke up and I remember ringing my manager and I said, I can't really breathe. And she said, I can hear that. I'm still not really thinking. And then it kind of progressed, and about day 8 or day 9, my breathing was really quite bad. And I remember ringing the doctor, my GP, and saying, look, I don't want to go to hospital, but I can't breathe. I remember her saying to me, we'll get you an ambulance and we'll take you. And I said, absolutely not am I getting into an ambulance. I'm not having my neighbours look at me, And I got a lift to the hospital. And at that time, the protocol was, unless you were dying, you weren't getting admitted. If you remember way back then, it was, So they done all, my OBS, and my BP was sky high, and my temperature actually was really, really low. And I remember them asking me had I taken paracetamol because it was so low, and I said no, I hadn't. Obviously, my breathing was quite laboured. And they just sent me home and said, if you can't hold your breath for more than 4
seconds,
ring 999. And that was it. I went back home and I read the wave. I started to turn a corner then after about 3 weeks. I remember going out walking, because that's what you done. And I walked 5 miles. And then the next day I went out again and walked another 5 miles. And I remember thinking I shouldn't have done that. It was too much for me. And I was standing in Tesco's and the cough came back. I went through what felt like a relapse of the first time I became unwell with COVID. So this time my temperature spiked high, sore throat, breathing. I just felt horrendous. I felt like inside my head, when I turned my head, it was like on a merry-go-round. And my chest was really, really sore. And I was seen then at the COVID centre, found at my chest, and the doctor put me on antibiotics at that stage. And I came home, and then 3 days later I was back in the GP's getting put on stronger antibiotics because they thought at that stage then it had turned into pneumonia. Really from that moment on, every month I got worse, not better. I remember my GP saying to me, every month you'll start to get better. Just take it really slow and don't push yourself. And in fairness, I had one particular GP who had worked with ME patients before, and she's been around a long time, and she gave me very good advice. And I remember her saying that to me, but every month I was getting worse. But of course, I didn't know anybody else apart from one colleague who went out the same time as me. And thank goodness I had him to bounce off, because nobody else I knew had COVID. Long COVID wasn't a thing. I mean, I didn't get my long COVID diagnosis till 9 months because it wasn't back then, And every month just got worse. I took post-viral myalgia, I took post-viral pleurisy, I took costochondritis. I had infections, I had sinus infections, I was tachycardic, I had horrendous dysautonomia, but of course we didn't know what dysautonomia was then. We didn't even know how to articulate it. The nausea was overwhelming for months and months and months. I just lived sofa to bed, really. And it was just a horrendous time. And yeah, it just kept getting worse and worse. And it didn't really get ever better. It was just relentless. It was a new symptom every month. It wasn't that I was getting better every month. It was just every month was something new. And that was really, really tough mentally to cope with. Funny enough, I had a CT scan and they injected dye into the CT scan at about 8 months. I remember after that CT scan, my chest went into overdrive. It was the stinging and burning went to the next level in my lungs. And I remember asking people, do you think it could have been the dye? And everybody was like, oh, no, I've never heard of that before. And I remember reading, because as you know, we've become our own investigators. We have to from our psych vet. I remember reading that people with mast cell issues can't take things like anesthetics and dyes and things. And I thought, this definitely is happening to me. But I didn't really know what mast cell issues were. And it was all joining the dots. And actually, I had to go and see a private respiratory consultant at that time because my chest was horrendous. I couldn't lie down in the bed. I had to prop myself up. I had to wedge my mouth open at night so I could get enough air in because I couldn't, that intake of air, I couldn't get enough in. And I went to see him and he gave me steroids because the GPs wouldn't give me steroids because everything was coming back clear, as we know happens in long COVID. And it was at that time then he gave me a diagnosis of long COVID and it started to become a bit of a thing then. Then I started to turn a bit of a corner around 10-month mark. Of course, what did I do then? I went out walking in the forest and it was a really bitter, freezing cold day. Do you know the type where it takes your breath away? And I remember taking my inhaler around it a couple of times, which should have been a sign to get back in the car and go home. And I relapsed horrendously after that. And I'm talking about a 4 months relapse where everything just became really, really horrible and dark. And I had one infection after sinus infections and, I couldn't hardly stand. And every day was relentless. Every day you woke up, it was like, how am I going to get through this day? It was just illness and symptoms and pain and nothing that you took. I have had horrendous headaches every day since March. And at that time, they were utterly horrendous. They could have lasted for 17 days straight. And nothing took the pain away. And every day was just horrible. It was torturous. And I was in and around from the year mark to the 15-month mark, 16-month mark. My mental health really started to dip. And I started to have thoughts that I didn't want to be here anymore. And I talked about this in my first blog that I wrote. I decided that if this was my life, that I just didn't want to be here anymore. And I started to formulate a plan of what way I was going to effectively end my life. And I started to get safety and comfort from that plan and relief. I suppose a sense of feeling that I was in control again of my life because I haven't been since March. And I know from my background in psychiatry that that's very dangerous, that thought process, because I've often nursed patients who have been very suicidal and very unwell, and then you see a bit of change in them and they'll be doing their laundry or they're a bit brighter and you think well, there's a bit of a shift in their mental health, but actually they've made a decision that they're going to die by suicide and they get a sort of a bit of a reprieve. And I knew that that's the headspace that I was in, that it was dangerous to be getting comfort from these thoughts. So I had just come out of a 2-week relapse at that time, and my friends, we had decided to meet for coffee, 2 of my dear friends who are also psych nurses. And it was one of those moments where if somebody asks you how you are, you're going to burst into tears. And I sat down and my friend knew by just looking at me and she said, "What's wrong?" And I just burst into tears. And I said to her, I cannot do this anymore. I don't want to be here. I don't want to live. And they were giving me a bit of a stern talking to, and how come you haven't told us that? And, you need to ring the doctor. I remember saying, but sure, they all tell me it's in my head anyway, and I don't want to give them the pleasure of saying, didn't we tell you it was in your head? Because there was a lot of that, neurotic woman feel too when you went to speak to doctors about, yourself, they didn't believe a lot of what we were saying. And it's very hard to express and articulate how devastating this illness is, because I'm talking now, I'm expressing myself now. So people just don't understand the preparation we have to do before we come on here, and then the relapse after here. So it's very hard for people in general. But I remember my friends saying, who cares what they think of you? Lift the phone, you are not well. The thoughts inside your head are dangerous. You need to get help. And in around 16, 17 months then I rang down after I spoke to them that day, and I burst into tears with this particular GP who had been very good to me and still is, the only one really. And I said, you may put me on the SSRI. I'm not good here. And that really, really helped. And I suppose if I could say anything today to people that are listening to this and are struggling, and they're worried about the stigma of mental health, and they're worried about GPs because they think it's in their head anyway, I would say it was the best decision I made at that time in my life, was to go on that medication, because the thoughts that I were having were so horrendous and so intrusive that they were taking over me. And within a week, those thoughts had stopped on the medication. It's only a very mild SSRI, but it just stopped that dead in its tracks, and they've never come back. All right, my illness is still horrendous and I'm still struggling. Of course, I'm not as bad now as I was then, but it's enabled me to cope with the illness better. And I think I would recommend anybody. And it's quite ironic that a psych nurse was worried about the stigma of going down to get medication when I would be telling patients.
Yeah, it's so funny, isn't it? Well, not funny at all, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very easy to say things to other people, but seeing it in yourself is so much harder.
Yeah.
I've found the same with all sorts of things. I give advice to people all the time and I say, oh, well, you should do this. But then when I'm in the depths of a relapse and I'm feeling terrible, I forget to do all of those things.
And I think as a health professional, I've talked to many other health professionals, we're not the best patients, and we don't like to be the patient, and we don't like to be going saying I'm not well. It's very, very, I find that very difficult to take my hat off as being a nurse to I'm now the patient. I find that extremely difficult. So for me, that was a big part of why I couldn't admit the thoughts that I was having. So that's taken me up to, well, now I'm on 27.
I think it's a huge reminder about, the symptoms aren't in our heads, the symptoms are real, but there's so much connected with mental health, isn't there? Because, when you're ill for a very long time, it's incredibly tough, and everybody's got their own struggles depending on their own situations. So definitely it's a huge factor, I think.
I think it's only obvious that if you've been so profoundly unwell as we have, life-changingly unwell, where you can't leave your home and you can't do anything that you could do before, that it's going to impact on your mood. And I think we need to be okay with saying that. And I wasn't, obviously, for a very long time. And now I'm completely fine, because I wrote about it in my blog. And I think, there's so many people I see on Twitter, there's a particular gentleman I follow, and there's so many people that have died by suicide with long COVID. It's happening. It's a very real thing. People are ending their lives because they can't cope with the pain anymore. And that in itself is just utterly tragic, never mind the illness. So I think it's something that definitely needs to be recognised and accepted, that we don't feel shame that we're really mentally struggling. That's okay, because this is a big, massive deal, what we're going through.
Yes, exactly. On top of the whole pandemic and everything else, I think there are lots of people that don't have long COVID that have found the last couple of years tough.
Totally.
So when you add everything else on top, it's huge. I will absolutely pop a link to your blog in the show notes, so people can go and have a read of that if they're interested. You mentioned you'd paid privately to see a couple of specialists. So the health services near you, not particularly helpful. We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us.
Well, I had that one GP who was very supportive and, at the start got me x-rays and scans and was very good with me on the phone. If I would have rang down and said, I just think I need my sats checked, my breathing's getting worse, she'd been very good. I knew people, in particular my colleague who lived an hour from me in Belfast, the GP just completely refused to see him and was very dismissive on the phone. So I just felt incredibly lucky at that time. So yeah, I was seen then for my chest x-rays and my CT scans, and everything was coming back clear, as we know. And I was starting to think, what is wrong with me? It was actually my GP who'd rang me then at 6 months and said, there's a charity, Northern Ireland Chest, Heart and Stroke, they're doing a long COVID rehab program. And I said, but don't you need to have been in hospital to be, accepted to that? And she said, no, you don't. Ring them. So I rang them, they rang me back. And that was the first real lifeline support that I had, and indeed the people on the course we met on Zoom had. And in fact, the first day we met, everybody broke down in tears because we had been for 6, 7, 8 months inside the walls of our own home, not knowing anybody else like us, not being able to leave our home. We were just in a mess. That group was based off their previous rehabs that they had done with people who had strokes and heart attacks and things like that. But we did realise then halfway through that course that it was going to have to be altered because, it was not only just about exercise, it was also about your mental health and food, and it was about being kind to yourself. And if you couldn't do something that day, well, that was fine. You don't push yourself. I remember that one of the ladies who ran it saying to me, if you go for a 5-minute walk and you come back in and 10 minutes later you don't feel better, you feel worse, you don't go for a walk. So there was lots of really good advice being given even at that time. And we really didn't know that we shouldn't be going out walking really at all if you're that weak that you can't stand up and you're feeling dizzy. And I mean, again, we didn't know what dysautonomia was, so I pushed through. But we very quickly realised halfway through that I actually couldn't go out walking anymore because it was starting to relapse me. It was making me unwell. So my focus then was on meditations daily, which I am a big lover of and have done for years anyway. Meditation and breath work has been the only things that have kept me sane and got me through times when I couldn't get out of bed, was just doing a meditation to shift my mind and take me to somewhere different than my reality. So they were absolutely fantastic. And I remember doing a news interview at the time about it, and then lots of other people went on the second course that they offered, and I'm friendly with those people now to this day. So you've met loads of people, like you said earlier before this, that you would never have met. So that we done that, and then I got offered to do another rehab program at about 9 months with a physio here in Ireland who had taken a particular interest in long haulers. He was lovely. Belfast Back Care, I'll do a wee plug for him. They were really sympathetic and said to us, if you can't do something or it's too much, just tell us and we'll stop, which is, again, suppose for that time was really cutting edge, because I still hear of people now in rehab courses being told that they must increase their exercise and they must push through, and all this absolute nonsense that we know now is so dangerous. He had started the first day doing the how many times can you sit from the chair and stand in 30 seconds up and down, and we all just said to him, listen, after it, we're not doing that. We're just half dead here. And he really rethought the program. And what we ended up doing for that rehab for 6 weeks was lying on the floor on our backs, doing the most gentlest of Pilates movements with our legs and arms, maybe for about 5 minutes max. And then the rest of the time spent doing meditation and breath work. And it's actually, at 6 weeks, I was really loving it, and really was sorry that was over, because I really felt that I could have gone to that every week forever. He just got us. He tested our vital signs before and after each activity, and if they shot up, it was like, right, no, we're not doing it. I mean, he was really about, at that time, he was really thinking above and beyond, because I had been to other physios private and they were trying to get me to do crazy things. It's that typical rehab approach, and it's not to criticize them. It's just they were coming from a rehab perspective, but we now know that doesn't work for many of us. For the majority of people I know, it's made us a lot worse. So after that, I had heard nothing until I was offered the long COVID clinic just about a month ago. So I waited that long to be seen. They said to me it would be patient education on Zoom and symptom management. And I had asked them, was there going to be any exercise involved in this? Because I had obviously been around the block and I wasn't prepared to do it. You know, he was lovely. He was a really nice guy. Didn't really have much of an understanding about the whole microclotting issue, the vascular side of it. Didn't really have much of an understanding that if you do rehab, actually it makes people a lot worse. And he actually was very interested in my story about South Africa, the whole microclot thing, and I give him a lot of people's names to go and Google. He was very receptive, but he admitted to me that really I could probably teach them how to symptom manage, and there was no point in me going to sit in Zoom and have somebody tell me how to manage my symptoms and to exercise, because I told them I just wouldn't be doing it, and that was that.
It's like that would have been really helpful, like right back at the start, but 27 months in, it's kind of shutting the door after the horse is bolted, isn't it, a little bit?
Totally, and it's so inappropriate if we talk about the long COVID clinics and how they should be a specialist team, that the staff that you speak to still don't know anything about long COVID. It's in the NICE guidelines. It's in World Physio guidelines. There's people shouting about it from the rooftop. I feel like I'm banging my head off the wall, because how is this information not getting out there? Because I know so many people like myself who are advocating this, but the people that you want to hear don't seem to hear it. If we look back at post-viral illnesses, it's not a new concept. If we look back at ME and those poor people, what they had to go through and being pushed and forced to exercise, it doesn't work. It's never worked. But I think unless, I suppose, you're in this world, you're not really aware of that. We agreed in the end then that they were going to just discharge me from the long COVID clinic, because, well, what were they really offering me? And they were going to refer me to psychology, because I have finally accepted that I do need to speak to somebody, because, you know, my life has changed significantly. And I'm really doing this on my own. So I'm waiting on that. But everything outside of that, I paid for privately, and I sought myself. And, you know, I talked a bit about the Chinese herbs that I've been taking, and with a lady, she's actually in London, but it was a project for healthcare workers that they could get free herbs. This was a way back at the start. And she's fantastic. She's a wealth of knowledge, and it's all about Chinese medicine and looking at the tongue and seeing what's wrong with the whole body. Craniosacral therapy has been another big thing for me. That has helped me regulate my menstrual cycle. I all of a sudden started getting my cycle every 2 weeks, and that was pretty horrendous, on top of being on blood thinners. And hyperbaric oxygen therapy has been a big one for helping me with lots of symptoms on my breathing, my chest and stuff. But of course, you know, you have to pay for them, a lot of money, and travel, which is extremely sore on the body. And really, that's the input that I've had.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? Because, you know, we think, oh, well, I'll try that because someone suggested that, and that sounds like a great idea because it helped them. But it's a lot of effort to, you know, look it up, work out what you're doing, start putting it into practice. Sometimes there's travel involved, or other people, or money, and, you know, a lot of us aren't able to work. So there's huge issues in so many different areas, isn't there, for all of that?
Totally. And also, what really was key, I think, in starting to get a bit of strength and inner strength, was when I went to Viola Sampson, who is a microbiome specialist, and I see her as well every month. I send a stool sample, and she tests to see what essentially what's deficient in my gut, and we're kind of always tinkering it, you know, and that has definitely helped me. And I would recommend anybody to sort out their gut health. And she herself had ME for 12 years, so this woman knows what she's talking about, and she really gets it and understands. And actually, craniosacral therapy was the thing that she recommended for me, because that was the first thing that started to heal her in her illness. So I definitely think there are lots of other things that you can do to bring on the healing, to help the healing, but it's all money. And, we must acknowledge that as well, that not everybody's in the position to be able to do that. So it's very sad.
Yeah, definitely. And you were talking earlier about some of the groups that you've been involved in with the rehab and things, and that idea of peer support, learning from other people. Because I've certainly found, you hear someone talking about something that they've tried and you think, oh, I'd never thought of that, I'll look into that. And actually that's where I've got most of my best ideas from, is from speaking to other people. It's not actually from the doctors at all.
No, their lack of knowledge on post-viral illnesses in general, never mind long COVID. They're uninterested in getting to know anything. I find my experiences with the majority of the healthcare professionals, it's astounding. I'm convinced there's an autoimmune issue going on with me. And if we look at the research and we look at women, particularly in my age bracket from long COVID, they're developing autoimmune issues. And I know 2 friends that have tested positive who are my age. And I requested it from the GP and they said, no, I know by looking at you, you don't have an autoimmune issue. And I said, oh, really? Wow. I've had to source that test myself privately. It cost me £100 because I have some symptoms. And I've always had eczema and allergies, and I just think there's something more going on with me, a gut feeling. And there is another example of a clinician not thinking outside the box and thinking, all right, she doesn't present typically the way I should present, but long COVID is a very different illness. It's the inability to look and think outside the box and just completely write the person off. And I've said, I'm going into my 3rd year of illness. I think it's reasonable that I get this test. I think I've really rid this wave out long enough. And I think we should be starting to think and look at other investigations. And it was just a no. No, I know the lab wouldn't do it. So I've done that myself, but I'm really intrigued to get those results back. But I think the lack of support and lack of interest, it just astounds me. It kind of feels like nobody really wants to help me to get back to work. Nobody really, you're just left to get on with life and ring down for a sick line and you get your sick line and that's it. And I know the health service is under tremendous pressure. I'm a nurse, I get it. I've been there, I've been burnt out. But there's a general lack of interest and empathy. I have felt being a patient has been extremely eye-opening for me. And it's made me quite embarrassed actually to be part of the healthcare system in the way that I've been treated. It's been really unfair. And I think at times an animal would have been treated better. At times I've been made to feel like it's in my head and I'm being dramatic. And to go through an illness is life-changing, as we both know that this is, to have your whole world turned upside down and to not have people believe you. I think we're all going to have a lot of psychological issues for many years to come off the back of this. This physical part is only part of it, and I think the mental, psychological part will be something that stays with us for a very, very long time. And if I'm honest, I feel great anger about that now, about how I've been treated and about how I've been disbelieved. I'm not the type of person who just sits in their house and doesn't work. That's not my makeup. And for people to think that I'm not telling the truth, there's a lot to be answered for in terms of how we've all been made to feel. And even doctors like Dr. Asad Khan, when I hear him being interviewed, how he's been made to feel, I think there's a great lesson to be learned here about how we treat people in general. It's really made me think about the way I interact with people, from now on.
Yeah, totally. I think you're absolutely right about the long-term implications physically and mentally. I've been noticing it in myself and I've heard other people talking as well. I think you're absolutely right. So can we talk a little bit about South Africa? How did that come about? Talk us through it. We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. so please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much.
As usual, us long haulers, just trying to find any way to get better from our bed. And I had put my name down for the list for Germany. I'd seen Assad can do the interview in the BBC, and I thought, I'm going to Germany. And I put my name on the list. And 6 months passed, and that had taken me up to my 2-year mark. And I emailed Germany and I said, look, have you any idea? Because we didn't know where we were in the list, or it was all very sort of trial by error. And they said, look, we can't tell you where you are on the list, and we can't tell you how long it's going to be. And I had started going to hyperbaric oxygen therapy and had met a guy there who had been to South Africa in January. And he said to me, why don't you go to South Africa and see if you have the clots like I did before you go to Germany, spend all these thousands. Why don't you rule it out first? And I said, South Africa, wow, how did I get to South Africa? And he said, grand, get a night flight. You can do it, it's fine. I kind of thought, it's 2 years now into this illness, I need to do something. And I just, before I knew it, I rang South Africa and I said, can I book an appointment to get my bloods tested for, the microclots? And they said, yes, we can give you an appointment in 3 weeks. And I nearly fell off my kitchen chair because, you just know how alien that was to get, what, 3 weeks? And of course I couldn't do it.
It's like so unusual for someone to say yes to something too.
And she knew what they were. She knew what this bloods were for microclots. It was surreal. But of course, my son was graduating in 3 weeks. So anyway, I went out a bit later. For anybody listening and worried about the journey, all I can say was I was just coming out of a relapse because I'd been to my son's graduation, and we met him in Heathrow. He came with us. And I couldn't have done it without him, even lifting suitcases and things, which, we can't do. And it was like somebody was looking over me because we got upgraded to the business club lounge. And that was lovely because my head was just starting to burst open with pain. And it was dim lights, and it was free food, and it was just a lovely experience. And we sat there, and my head was getting progressively worse. And I remember thinking at a point in time, we were sitting in the wheelchair to get on the plane, I just wanted to turn around and go home. I thought, what are you doing? You're crazy. You're trailing your family halfway around the world. And I was so ill. And I remember my mum looking at me, and she knew I was really struggling. And before I knew it, a guy just came out of nowhere and said, right, we're going. And I thought, this is a sign. And I got on the plane, and I lay on my right hand side for an hour, and something very interesting happened as the plane was ascending. The pressure changed in the cabin, and my headache left me. So we had something to eat and stuff, and I took night sedation. We all did. And literally, I woke up in South Africa the next morning. So the flight was absolutely fine for people worried about it. If you get a night flight, see, the wheelchair support was absolutely fantastic. They met me off the plane. I flew from Ireland to London Heathrow. They met me off the plane in Heathrow in a wheelchair. They fast check you through security. They fast check you through baggage. And we needed it. I couldn't have done it. I could not have done it without their support. And the staff were absolutely lovely. So don't let that worry you in terms of how you would cope, because that was one of the things I was worried about. And again, when I was off the plane in South Africa, somebody met me, fast tracked through everything, and I had booked a private driver to the hotel. Then I had arranged to go and get my bloods taken, and that was in Stellenbosch. I stayed in Cape Town. So Stellenbosch is about 45 minutes from Cape Town. It's a beautiful oldie worldy type area, and Uber was like 20 quid. So, again, everything in South Africa was cheap. It was just the flight were the expensive part. And that was really crazy that morning, going to get bloods taken for these clots. And they were lovely. They were waiting for me. The hospital was absolutely stunning. Money talks. It was private, obviously. They were just really, really nice and welcoming. And I was in the waiting room waiting to go in, and Lisa Pistorius walked in, and I was just like a teenage girl, and I was saying to my son, do you know who she is? And he said, Mommy, you're behaving like a starstruck teenager. And I said, she's a hero, in the long COVID community. And she was so lovely and down to earth. The way it worked then, I'm not sure about how it is now. You got your bloods taken, and then 3 days later you come back and see. I call him Dr. Jaco because his surname with my cognitive issues at the minute. I think it's Lugshire, Dr. Lugshire, but I say Dr. Jaco. Yeah, and so you went. He brought us in, me and my son went into the room, and he was the first doctor in 2 years that had said to me, so tell me all your symptoms. I'd never been asked that by a doctor in 2 years, and that completely blindsided me because I hadn't prepared. I think the whole thing was overwhelming for me anyway, and I just said a few symptoms, and I looked at my son and said, tell the doctor what my symptoms are. And he had to take over for me. He discussed with me the whole microclot and vascular aspect of long COVID, went into great detail about it, showed me a little model of veins and the endothelial layer and capillaries, and how these microclots are essentially blocking up the capillaries and then causing endothelial damage, which is the layer inside the blood vessels, And then he talked about the hyperactive platelets and about how they become hyperactive, and about how essentially the body starts to attack itself. Sort of my stage into the journey, when you're not treating the illness, then you start to have what we're thinking now, these autoimmune issues and inflammation. And there's no point in me trying to remember what he said to me, because I really can't, because the whole thing was just so overwhelming. I just know that he was very nice, spent a lot of time with me and my son. My son asked him a lot of questions. And then he said to me, right now we're going to go and look at your blood results. And I was still a bit like, I don't really think I have these, after 2 years. And he pulled up my results, and I had microclots and my platelets were hyperactive. My microclots were a score of grade 2. So they certainly weren't the worst, but they were certainly there. And he explained it to me that they were all throughout my body. My platelets were hyperactive. Again, I've seen people with a lot worse, but they certainly weren't normal. And they were probably worse than my platelets. So we went back into his office, and he prescribed me then the triple therapy that we hear about. So mine was 75 of clopidogrel, 5 milligram of apixaban BD, which is twice a day, and 75 milligrams of aspirin. And he also prescribed me lots of other things for my other symptoms. He couldn't believe I hadn't been given help with, really. He also gave me medication for, as a female, when you're on triple therapy, to sort of slow down the menstrual cycle or stop the intensity of it. And if anybody is thinking about getting it done, please ask that particular doctor for it, because you really do need it. And really, that was it. He told me then to go home, and that, I would feel worse as the blood clots were dispersing into the blood. That was all the inflammation and proteins and all the muck essentially being dissolved into your blood. So he said, you're going to feel worse. Don't panic. And he sent me a hematology report and pictures of my clots. And he said to me, WhatsApp me every Friday with your progress. And he gave me his mobile number. I think in all my years as a nurse, I've certainly never had an experience like that with a doctor over here in the last 2 years. And he said, just contact me with updates every week. That was just a completely mind-blowing experience. And I can't tell you the thought process at that time. I just remember being so overwhelmed. And it's really crazy. We'd kind of had a celebration meal that night in the hotel because I had blood clots. That sounds really crazy. After 2 years of being told, you just need to be patient. There's nothing wrong with you. Everything's clear. To actually know I really am unwell. We were all a bit high. We were all a bit like, this is brilliant, and then I came home and started taking the treatment.
Yeah, it's like that validation almost, isn't it?
Yeah.
Being told that your tests are normal is great because you're healthy, but also that you're not healthy. So it's like, you've got this inner fight, haven't you, going on, thinking, am I just making this up? No, I'm not making this up. And then that drives you nuts, doesn't it?
Certainly, yeah.
How did it go when you started taking the triple treatment?
So like everything with long COVID, the answer to that isn't straightforward. And I'm going to be honest with people, because I know there's a lot of people who want to hear about triple therapy, and I wanted to tell them my honest experience. So Actually, a side note before I start telling this story, Dr. Jaco had said to me, "You've been unwell for so long. I don't know if you'll 100% be the person that you were." I really appreciated his honesty, but I knew I didn't go over it there for a cure. I think when you've been unwell for 2 years, your body has got a lot of stuff happening. There's a lot of stuff going on with it. And I think for people to think that you're going to do 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 8 weeks of a triple therapy and you're going to be magically cured, it's not the way it is. But it's certainly a huge, massive part of the puzzle. So I knew before I went out there that I wasn't going to come home and be cured. So I think it's important that people realize, certainly the sooner you get the triple therapy, your chances of a full recovery are much, much more. And I've actually met people in South Africa who I'm still in touch with who were at the 6 month mark and they're doing really, really well on it, but they were caught a lot sooner than me. And I think we need to be very mindful of that when we're talking about triple therapy and any therapy. The longer you've been unwell, the longer your recovery is going to be. So I came home, and the first week I started taking the medicine, I was feeling a bit brighter and a bit perkier. And I noticed that when I stood, because I have terrible problems standing, my mobility is horrendous. And I remember thinking I was a bit stronger feeling. Oh my goodness. I was a bit worried that I wasn't becoming unwell, because that's what you want, isn't it? To get rid of all the clots. And then I got my wish. 7 or 8 days in, bang, I had a horrendous 2 weeks. And what had started to happen just before South Africa is that my menstrual cycle had started to come every 2 weeks, which was a totally new presentation, because for 19 months, there was practically nothing happening every month. So then I started taking the medication, and then those second 2 weeks were absolutely horrendous. Then my stomach was giving me a lot of bother, because I would have a very bad stomach from COVID. And I knew that it was the apixaban in particular that was triggering my stomach pain. So I dropped from 10 milligrams a day of it to 5 milligrams a day, just to help the pain. And I became really, really bright, reactive. I noticed that my sensory issues weren't as bad. I noticed that I could tolerate louder noises. Everybody that met me, my friends and family, were saying, "I can definitely see change in you." Now, I still felt very weak and shaky inside, but I felt a bit more sharper, a bit more with it. Then I had to go back up to 10 milligrams of apixaban, because Dr. Jaco wanted me to be on the full dose, because he said, "I don't know if it works." So I went back up to the full dose, and within days I felt horrendous again. And I thought, right, just go with it, just go with it. And essentially I took the triple therapy then for 9 weeks in total. And as I say, my periods were coming back the whole time. And my iron then became very low, and my hemoglobin. And I really have felt terrible. I stopped the triple therapy about a week ago, partly because I had ran out, and secondly because I was supposed to go to Germany for follow-up bloods, which I talked about in my blog, but I wasn't fit to travel. Physically and psychologically can't do this trip, and I knew it was going to relapse me horrendously, because I don't have any strength to deal with it. So I had been in touch with Dr. Jaco and explained to him what the problem was at the minute, and that I just wasn't able to make the trip. But hopefully, as I build myself up again, I will go back out. I'm pretty confident that after 9 weeks of it, considering my score was a 2, was quite mild, that I've given my body a good blast of what I would say is it was my chemo to my cancer. I feel it was very unfortunate that my iron became very low. But I think, when you're menstruating every 2 weeks and you're on blood thinners, it's pretty cruel. And I have no doubt that that has impacted. And it's hard to tell the response that I would have had if I didn't. I do know other people that are on it. And it is tough, I think, for people out there wanting to know whether they should try it or not. For me, I absolutely don't regret it. It's a massive part of the puzzle. It's there, the blood results were there. And I think unless we get our blood flow and our circulation right, we're not going to get better. But I think you got to be mindful that it does take you on a roller coaster, and it's not easy. It's incredibly sore on an already fragile body. The fatigue from it is absolutely overwhelming, because they're all medications and chemicals. But to highlight the benefits that I've had from it then are that my sleep is so much better now. My sleep was really quite bad. I'm sleeping much more deeply now. My circulation is a lot better. My hands and feet were either extremely cold or extremely warm. There was no in between. Conversely enough, my food intolerances are nowhere near as bad. I have mast cell issues. I found when I was on the blood thinners that I actually could eat a lot more foods than what I had been able to eat prior to that. The pressure headaches aren't as bad. Although I've had a bad head for a couple of days there, I don't know what's triggered that. I'm going through the eliminations, was it something I ate? Was it something I done? Because it's quite out of character. It hasn't been like this for a long, long time. But yeah, so they were the benefits of the treatment. And I'm now back on lumbrokinase and serapeptase, which I was on before I went to South Africa. And they're natural blood thinners. And the serapeptase is the only thing that helps me with, I have extreme pain in my limbs. Nothing touches it. Codeine, nothing touches the pain. And that's the only thing that helps me. So I'm back on those because I knew that they worked for me before I went out. And when I get the strength up again, I'll go and get my bloods done to see what way my body has responded to them. It's just unfortunate. It's just one of those things. But I think you have to stop pushing yourself at a certain time when you're so profoundly unwell and think, I actually can't make this journey, and not beat yourself up about that. This is this illness. It's so back and forward, one step forward and 500 steps back.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good reminder as well, isn't it? That there are things that work, but we're also working with a body that is unpredictable. And, you have to kind of work with it rather than against it, don't you? Like you were just saying.
Yeah, totally. Well, I would say do your research about it. People would say to me, they would message me and say, should I do this? I can't tell you. You have to go with your gut. For me, I had to do it. It was right for me. It was proof. It was validation. It's a massive part of the puzzle, what's going on with us. And I think to have that validated, that you have clots and that your platelets are hyperactive, it's so validating. But the treatment it's hardcore. I mean, Dr. Jaco told me that all his patients, that he was looking after with COVID, when he put them on anticoagulants straight away, not one of them has long COVID. And I think that's the nuance part of it, that we're going 2 years later and there's other damage being done. So I think we have to be realistic. If you're a long hauler like me, I think the first 6 months, even the first year, is you have a better chance of full recovery on anticoagulants. But I think by the time you get to my stage, it's a harder road. It's not to say that it hasn't helped me. It has. They have helped me. But it's not a magic cure. And I've heard other people say that. And I think we need to be mindful of that. There's a lot of people that put in a lot of hope and a lot of money that this is going to be the magic cure. And it's certainly a part of the puzzle and pathology that you need to address to get better. But it's not the magic bullet, and I wanted to be honest with people about that.
Yeah, that's really, really useful to hear. And like you say, yeah, everybody has these hopes and dreams and expectations, because why wouldn't we after so long? So yeah, like you say, it's for people to do their research and make their decisions, I guess.
You have to do what's right for you, is all I say to people, because I think it's so personal, and people can say, well, you told me this, and I just don't want to get into that. You just have to do what you feel calls you.
Exactly. You can tell people your experiences, but you can't tell people what to do.
Yeah.
That's got to be up to them, hasn't it, in the end? But I'm really glad that it has had some positive effects on you. So that's positive.
Yeah. And I think now I just need to build myself up again. And I'm certainly, whenever your iron's low, you're going to feel horrible. So I think I'm on supplements now for that, and I'm building myself up. And sure, who knows what I'll be like in 3 months? It's like everything with this illness, you just have to wait. And I know another guy on it, he's the same length of time with me, and he didn't obviously have issues with his hemoglobin and stuff, and he does feel better, and he really is glad he done it, but he's still not cured. He's still not the person he was, so he's doing well. So I really feel another couple of years before I'll be hopefully, back to some sort of normality. But I think I just had to remain very realistic about it. It's not going to be a quick fix. It's that old thing with long COVID. It's time and patience, and that's the killer, because people are losing their lives and their jobs and their partners, and it's easy to say, but I don't think we have any other way to manage this than, it sounds a bit hippie, but I just had to learn to surrender. I just had to surrender to this illness, because you can't dominate it. And I think that's what's kept me going and keeps me seeing that what else can I do? I just have to try and ride the wave and, take it one day at a time.
All the things that we're really bad at doing, I think, as humans are actually the things that may be the most useful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been absolutely wonderful speaking to you and hearing about all your experiences and the things that have helped and that haven't.
Yeah.
So I wish you all the best with your recovery as well. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch